All right, we've officially created one animation now using cells. And in this animation, what we did was we created keyframes. So that means for every movement that happens in the animation, it has to have a corresponding keyframe. Keyframes typically used to indicate major points of movement. Okay, those are the ones that we call keys. But in Animate, there's a term in there that can be a little bit confusing, just called keyframes. A keyframe in Animate is just any frame where you've got a movement happening. So in Animate, what it looks like is right here. You've got a little gray square with a black dot in the middle, and the black dot is filled. If you have nothing in the frame, so for instance, if I create a blank frame after this, it's the same color as the timeline and it's a hollow circle. Okay, so I'm going to undo. I don't want that in there. And if you don't have any movement happening, like with the background doesn't move. You have one keyframe. This keyframe is there to say, here's where the background is. But since it never changes, it's just solid gray until the end, and it's ended with this black or this rectangle. All right. So there's another way to animate within Animate. Okay, I know that gets a little confusing, but within software, there's another way to animate, and that's called using tweens. This is closer to what you're going to do when you create 3D animation because most of what the software is going to do is animate for you in 3D. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a new document, an ActionScript 3.0 document. Now, in the last one, I talked about using symbols. And we didn't really do anything with the symbol. Okay, but symbol is good because it minimizes system resources. So in the last one, if you would have used pixels for each one of those, it sets up a little bit more demand on the system. Now it only ends up being a second and a half animation, so it's not huge, but on a larger scale, it does matter. So for this one, we are also going to use symbols, but it's required for tweens to work. Okay, so if you don't use symbols, you can't use a tween. Okay, you can't create a motion tween. Now, one thing you may notice is that my frames are a different size than yours, and I resized that right down here. Okay, so if I want to control how many frames I'm seeing in the viewer, okay, I can raise or lower this. Now the benefit is if I'm trying to click on a specific frame, it's easier to spot if it's much larger. I can easily tell, okay, this one is frame 25. Whereas if it's shrunk down to its smallest size, it's kind of hard to see what frame I'm targeting. Okay, you usually want something in between or something on the smaller side, otherwise your timeline doesn't stretch very far. But for right now, I'm going to set it up right about there. And I'm going to set up my stage a little bit differently because I've already gotten questions from people asking, how do I change the color of the stage? Okay, paint bucket doesn't work. You can't use the paint bucket to fill it. When you create the document initially, it ends up being just this white stage by default. But if you look over here on properties, and if this isn't up on yours, go to the black arrow and target the black arrow, and it should populate with this information. This tells you what the size is, it tells you the frame rate. It also has an icon for the stage. Okay, so if I click on that, I can change the color of my stage. Now for this one, I'm going to go with a dark gray stage. So it's going to be a little bit tougher to tell. Actually, I'm going to go with black. Okay, that way it stands out from my background. Now, if I still put something that's larger, because if you remember, there was that one thing, the timing sheet. Okay, when we did the timing sheet, it was larger than the stage, and you could see those black lines. You can still see the black lines. Okay, so let me get rid of that. Didn't need that in the space. All right, so what we're going to do is go ahead and animate something using tweens. First, we need an object. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to check right down here on my stroke. My stroke is set to none. My fill is set to solid. And I'm going to go with this green color, and that's fine. And let's go with, you know what? You guys might find some interest in the Polystar tool. Okay, if I click and drag on this, right now mine is set to a star. Okay, if you choose options though, you will have different ways that you can make it. So I can choose, let's say, a 20-sided star. And then if I make that, it's going to do this. Okay, if I can also go and make it into a polygon, if I make it a 20-sided shape, it's almost like a circle, but if you see when I get bigger, it's not quite a circle. Okay, but it's effectively a circle. All right, I'm just going to use my select tool, click these and delete them. I'm going to keep the star though. All right, so I'm going to target the star, and now I need to convert this to a symbol. Okay, right now when I look over in my library, I've got nothing going on. So what I will do is go up here and choose Modify and Convert to Symbol. The shortcut for that is F8. So I'm going to convert it to symbol, and I'm going to name this one Green Star. Now the reason that you want to name them is that if you go to look for them in the library to use again, okay, then it's going to be easy to spot. Okay, and I'm going to leave it as a graphic symbol, and a registration, I like to have the registration into the middle. We're going to talk more about registration later. Okay, but I'm going to name it Green Star, and I'm going to say OK. So I've got a graphic symbol right there, and I can move it around any place that I want. Now, anytime I need a green star, I can just come over here from the library and start dragging in all the green stars that I want. Okay, and if I go and resize this green star, okay, it's not going to do anything about the next green star that I bring in. Okay, now that reminds me, be careful. If you double click one of these items, you can come and run into problems. Okay, so if I double click the item, like if you ever see these dots on it after you've turned it into a symbol, take a look up here. What this means is I'm actually editing the star. So if I resize a star here, it's going to resize every other instance of that star. Okay, so symbols can get a little bit tricky. You want to make sure this only says seen. So if it's got more than that, you can click this arrow until it only says seen. And I'm going to name this layer star layer. So what I did is I double clicked right on the word itself and I typed in star, and I accidentally had caps locked on. So there we go. All right, so that says star. All right, now to create our first motion tween, let's get this one wrapped up. Okay, so from here, I'm going to go ahead and put the star where I want it to begin. I'm just going to make it go across the page. Okay, that's it. Similar to like when you had a bouncing ball. Okay, you just had the bouncing ball move. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is right click on the frame itself. Now this is where it can be helpful to make it larger so that you can see exactly where you're working. So I'm going to right click on the frame itself, and I'm going to choose Create Motion Tween. All right, so that's going to automatically push your frame count out to 1 second. And you'll notice the frames change to blue. When you have a motion tween active, it changes the color to blue. Okay, now it gets complex when you have a motion tween because you can't have other objects on there. Okay, but we'll get into that. Now, if I want this to go out further, I can click and drag on the end of it. Let's say I want this to take 2 seconds to move across the page. And let's say instead of right here, so I want to make sure anytime I move this, I want to make sure my timeline is actually looking at the right spot. Even though it's not moving around, it now can affect things dramatically. So I'm going to have it start off stage, and then I'm going to move my timeline down to the end, and in 2 seconds I want it to move to that end. Okay, and you'll see this line form. Okay, and you can use this line as well. Okay, and this part can get a little bit tricky too, especially after the first move. But if I wanted this to say move in an arc like this, okay, now if I press the enter key, so that's showing you the path that it's going to take. If you want it to do something a little bit different, it can get tricky. Okay, but you can move this, so if I wanted it to bend more like this, let's say I wanted it to start right there and bend something like this. Okay, now see what I was talking about it getting tricky? It starts doing this weird stuff if you play with it too much. Okay, so just be aware, if you play around with it too much, it could go wonky. So now I've got it doing something like that. Okay, so that is how you create a basic motion tween. Go ahead and create some on your own, and then we're going to move on to the next part of this.